So my comments on the debate. This will be open to anybody who wants to join, but I don't think anybody's going to see it. Merritt, who I debated on the 70 weeks, I forget how long ago now, debated Scott Clem, I think is his last name. If I remember, it's slipping my mind for some reason. Who's not, who's a Baptist and used to have a kind of a common view. He did amazing, but it's like they cannot hear it. They just can't hear it. That's okay. It just bugs the crud out of me. The quote he read towards the end there, I forget who he said wrote it. I felt like that guy was my brother. It's just like he hit it on the head. Like it's like I've from studying this last several years, I see how they've been brainwashed into reading it, and it's very linear. And then they're like, that's like forever. This is like why they go after your kids when they're young, to teach them nonsense. Because it gets pressed in your mind as that's what it says. And then it's like to change that, you almost feel like you've decided. It's like views get so ingrained in us that even to consider another view is like already letting go of your view before you've even actually had a chance to reason with it. It's like once you've been set to read because I can see it in the way Merritt argues, the arguments he makes for the like it's a problem or something that Jesus confirms the covenant for a week when the gospel's been going out to the world since then. It's like, no, dude. He ratifies the covenant within the Jewish economy of the 7-year time periods that God is judging them by, where they didn't keep the yearly Sabbath. I mean, the 7-year Sabbaths, 70 and then 70 times 7. And you see that kind of crop up. So the allotted period, so Scott brought up the two arguments that really should be deal breakers, and they're not somehow. And he hit both of the ones I would say I've concluded at this point are absolutely standalone, should be enough to end the debate. Like, just a lot of people that struggle with context in certain ways, I think. Like, you got to think, how could this possibly make sense to the first century? In fact, Scott brought up another one that I often forget about that is one of the better. And I tried to hammer it home with the question I asked, which was the first question in the audience Q&A. I tried to help support that, and he actually answered it and gave support. But it's like that. Well, as the question, Mayor didn't seem to get what I was talking about, which is neither here nor there. But the covenant language. And I've shown videos on this. If you look up the term covenant, it's mentioned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in the KJV. I think it's 298 times. There's 8 that have to do with the covenant. If you say don't count the ones about in Daniel, because if you think those are the Antichrist covenant, the narrative of the Bible in the term covenant is certainly between God and man, 98% of the time, excluding the Daniel ones for now, for consideration, because that would change it just barely towards more that aren't about between God and man. There's a covenant of death in Isaiah 28, but that's metaphorical language. But the promise of the Messiah is all based on the covenant that God's making with man, that he'll bring a new covenant. And of course, the longest quote of the Old Testament in the New Testament is Jeremiah 31:31. And it's quoted twice in the book of Hebrews to emphasize it. And then it added, and the old is passing away, soon to be gone. That's why people likely say Hebrews was certainly written for the temple was destroyed. So there's a temple standing, and you're a Christian in the first century. And you receive this book, this letter that's circulating to the Hebrews, which, by the way, is not just to Hebrews. If you look at the context in the audience within the text itself, it's mixed multitude. Okay, we don't know exactly why it's called Hebrews. We can speculate, but it certainly was to just believers during that time period, and we know that it went to them, and it's an accepted book. Now, luckily, Scott actually read the text I was speaking to. In Luke 3, they're in expectation. They know when the Messiah is supposed to come, or that he's expected at least. How would they know that? Futurists never come up with a good answer. There's a reason that's there. They think John the Baptist might be him. Why? Because even if they didn't know when the right decree was, they would have known that Cyrus's decree was possibly it. When Daniel wrote Daniel, those time periods, they knew they were based on the sabbatical cycle, so they knew they were years, because you can't build a temple that fast anyway. And they know when the decree started, how long it took to build the temple anyway. So they knew they were years, the 70 weeks. So that's no question. And everybody universally agrees on that. So you could just say they were counting from all the decrees that are recorded in the text. And maybe they were expecting one 490 or 483 years after Cyrus's decree, but he didn't come. Maybe that's with the Maccabees, stuff with that, right? Maybe it's like, but the Messiah hadn't come yet. And now they know there's that third decree of Artaxerxes. And I would contend that is the right decree. But it certainly was it was one of the ones. It says the people were in expectation. They thought John the Baptist might be the Messiah. They wondered if it was Elias come back they were confused about stuff, but they knew the time periods, which is why Daniel 9:25 says what it does. From the going forth of a commandment unto Messiah the Prince. You know what that means? It means start your clock, and then this many weeks. They get so caught up with the fact that they say 7 and 62, and then there's a few versions that just butcher it. But we know, you can look this up and see, futurists who hold that view have always desperately tried to make a timeline fit, because everyone knew that that's the case. But now that they've established their wrong position, they kind of say, well, we don't really know. There might be gaps in there, and they totally ruin the text. And so I'm going to be kind of harsh here, because this is what's happening. I'm just being realistic. They, all of a sudden, it doesn't matter when. That's why Chris asked that, and it was a great question, by the way. You guys don't even have a starting date. We know from the New Testament they were expecting the Messiah when Jesus showed up on the scene. Why do you think the disciples just went with him? They knew who he was instantly, almost. They just like, come be my disciple, and they're like, boom. Probably because they thought the Messiah was good. It's just, the people were in expectation. They were buzzing. It's clear. And what is that scene in Luke 3? Why, it's Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Right at the end of the 69th week from that decree, even. And the people are expecting the Messiah. And what do you know? He shows up. Why were they expecting him? Because from the going forth of the decree till Messiah the Prince. So the 62 and the 7 are the reason. There's a couple reasons you could say they're broken up, but because they're Shemitah cycles, the first 7 would be the first Jubilee in celebration of the temple, the decree of the temple being restored. Because you don't have a restoration of the temple. Temples are just buildings, people. A church is just a building. A rebuild and a restoration requires the jurisdiction of the Jews to have their judges judging from the Torah in the temple from over the whole land, which is what they got in 457. The king of them, that Artaxerxes gave them, that they could even perform the death penalty over inhabitants of the land from the temple with the Torah, which is what a restoration is. Getting right with God requires having the Torah under the covenant, right, that God made with the Jews. That's what Daniel was praying about. He wanted to get back right with God. Think about it. He's in captivity. There is no temple. It's been destroyed. And he realizes the temple, the 70 years Jeremiah predicted are almost up, meaning what Jeremiah said they would suffer for their disobedience would be for 70 years. Now he's just got this vision in Daniel 8 about a temple being desecrated, and there is no temple. It's already been destroyed, and they're in captivity still. So Daniel 9 answers that. No one understood the vision in Daniel 8. And he starts praying about it and repenting for his people because he knows the 70 years are almost up. And he gets the answer, the mare, the vision, concerning a man, the appearance of a man. That man is Jesus Christ. So that quote Scott read was so good. Oh, I was going to see if anybody wanted to join, but I don't think anybody likes me anymore. So